Well, every time I talk to a vegan or someone, from that side of the aisle, I guess, on this podcast, or just listen to one of them talk, they always use LDL cholesterol as a stand-in for cardiovascular disease. So anything that lowers LDL cholesterol by definition reduces your risk of cardiovascular disease. Is that kind of what you saw? And what are your views on that?
Yeah, I suppose in the studies I were reviewing, they were looking at more hard outcomes like incidence of cardiovascular disease, which
Okay.
was way better than just using LDL.
Right.
And that was a good thing that they did, but the way that they formulated the study was really poor. So I guess the studies were just set up to show what they wanted to show.
Yeah.
You really could have drawn any conclusion you wanted. And I guess another really interesting point about those studies is that most of them were comparing whole grains with refined grains. They weren't comparing whole grains with no grains. So if you did whole grains and no grains, I mean, I would speculate that maybe you would have a different result.
Right.
They did whole grains with refined grains so they could be like, oh, look how good whole grains are. But they
Yeah.
didn't have a group necessarily that were eating eggs or something instead. Well, there was one review, I think it was a randomized controlled trial, in the review that compared whole grains with eggs, and the eggs were favoured. So that was interesting. But everything else was whole grains and refined grains. So yeah, it was not necessarily the outcomes they chose, but in terms of LDL being, I guess, a risk biomarker for cardiovascular disease, I think that's the science doesn't support it essentially as being a good predictor of risk. And that's because we know that there's different types of LDL as well.
Right.
So just saying high LDL causes cardiovascular disease or increases your risk of it doesn't make sense because that hasn't actually been shown. And it was funny you say that because when I guess gave my presentation to my cohort for my systematic review in type 1 diabetes. So we were getting marked on this. This was before anything was published. And I was just giving an overview in about a 10-minute presentation of my results. We had question time at the end and one of the lecturers said, oh, but you didn't get any information on LDL, so how do you actually know that what happened to their risk of cardiovascular disease? And I was kind of stumped because I was still a student and she was a lecturer and I thought, oh, well, she doesn't know. Like, why doesn't she know? Why does she think that? Shouldn't she know that LDL is not a risk factor for heart disease? But so many people still, hang their hats on it like it's so important. And even I'm doing another systematic review now and I sort of had to go, oh, do I use LDL? Because I feel like everyone's going to freak out if I don't. But then I said, no, I've got to stay true to what I know. And I see people come in all the time in my clinic with their high LDLs or just slightly, either really high or just slightly above normal, and they've got a little star next to them. And they get sent in from their doctor and their doctor is saying, you've got to fix their cholesterol, their risk of heart disease is going to be increased, and they're kind of using scare tactics on their patients. So their patients come in to me really worried. And I sort of just give them a little bit more of a breakdown of their cholesterol. And I say, well, you know that we would die if we didn't have any LDL in our blood. And if you want your body to burn fat, you're actually going to see potentially an increase in LDL because you can think of them like the little boats carrying fat around your body. And if you're going to be using more fat for fuel, you would expect there to be more boats. And it's not really until that LDL becomes damaged or oxidized and we can measure that with a different type of test, so an LDL subfraction test, which doctors never do. But if they're really genuinely concerned about LDL, I would suggest that they do the LDL subfraction test and actually see whether or not these people have dangerous LDL particles, so small dense particles, or whether or not they're nice and fluffy and buoyant and, you know, not a risk to health. Because I worked in the hospital setting as well just during my placement, and I was looking through lots of people's blood tests, and you know, the elderly people that would just come in because they've passed out or had a fall, or, you know, that was the majority of the patient population in hospital, elderly people, and their LDLs were really, really low, and they were all on statins, and none of them had had a history of heart disease, but they were just put on statins because they were high risk for cardiovascular disease. And part of me wonders, well, how much of their cognition deterioration and their fatigue is due to a very low LDL?
Yep. My mother-in-law, she lives with us in the back here. She's 90 years old, and she really fought me on taking her cholesterol medication. I was like, Betty, there's not a single study that you can look at that shows that 90-year-old women are helped at all by it. I mean, that just doesn't exist. I mean, nobody's doing studies on 90-year-old women taking a statin. I mean, we have no idea what it does to you. But I know that we survive without them for, you know, hundreds of thousands of years. We could probably do without them today, too. And I think we finally got her off. I don't know, she may be sneaking them out.
Well, it comes back to that education point we said as well. So as say, you know, if you give somebody the education and say, you know what, we have no idea if this statin's going to help you. You can take it if you want, but here are the risks, here are the negatives, whatever, here are the positives. And then that person makes an informed decision. Then if they still want to take it, cool. If they don't want to take it, cool. But everybody that comes in to see me, or everyone I've spoken to, have said, I don't want to be on medication. I want to get off medication. I hate taking all of these pills. They don't make me feel good. And then so you have to think, well, you know, has their doctor really explained to them why they're on these things, or have they just said, here's a prescription, take it, see you later, you're never going to get off it?
Yep.
And, you know, after that education and information, if people still want to take their medications, cool. But I can guarantee most people want to be off them.
Exactly. Yeah, in fact, I was just listening to a podcast, I think yesterday, with Dr. Joel Kahn. He's a famous vegan cardiologist, and he was talking about, you know, somebody comes in with high LDL, the first thing he does is put them on a vegan diet, and it drops their LDL, lowers the risk of cardiovascular disease. And I thought, man, you're putting them on a diet that takes all the sugar and all the grains out of their diet, telling them to eat a lot more vegetables. Of course, their blood lipids are going to improve, but it's not because they're eating all the vegetables. It's because you're taking the poison out of their diet, taking all that sugar and all those grains out, and you're seeing good things happen as a result of it. But unfortunately, every time he does that, that just reinforces the idea in his head that it's, you know, that's the veganism. That's, you know, it's the lack of meat that's doing it, and that's a hard little cognitive dissonance, you know, hurdle to overcome when you've got that in your head so strongly.
Exactly. Oops. Definitely.
My granddaughter just walked in.
Oh.
Just listen to her. So talk to us about Ellipse Health. What is that? How did you start it? And what is it you guys are doing over there?
So I actually started Ellipse Health before I'd graduated as a dietitian, and originally it just started as a platform for me to share information. So, you know, my dad is a really good businessman, and he just said to me, Jessica, all these things you tell me, you've got to put them out there for other people to read and other people to see. Because obviously I was making a lot of resources for my dad, so a lot of nutrition resources, and sending him a lot of articles and papers and writing things for him. And I love writing, so I would just always be making new things for him, and he said, you've got to put these out there to other people. So he and I sort of sat down together one night and came up, it's actually funny how Ellipse Health all came together, because he just said to me, you know, if you could only pick one food to be the healthiest food, what would it be? And I just said, probably an egg, because it has everything you need, and you could survive on just that. And so he just drew an egg, and then came, you know, in 30 minutes came up with the logo for Ellipse Health, which is just a lot of sort of circle kind of egg sort of circles overlapping each other. And that was interesting how that came together. It's a nice little story with my dad and I working together late one night. But then I just built this website and just loved writing and sharing information and trying to be as, I guess, evidence-based as I can, but also really using my skills in translating the scientific literature, which can be very confusing, to the everyday person that just wants to, learn about how this relates to their health as an individual. Because, when we go through our degrees, we can get very stuck in, this is what we have to do for the population, this is what we have to do for the health of Australia. And I think that's very, very important. But everyone is so different and so unique. And I believe they need to know how their own body works and how different things may or may not affect them to be able to actually improve their health. And I guess, I went through a journey on my own health journey, and really took control of my health. And that came from good education surrounding nutrition. When I was stuck in my sort of disordered eating years of life, I didn't know about how food affected my body. I had no idea. All I cared about was whether I was losing weight or gaining weight. All I cared about was calories. I did not care about vitamin D. I did not care about omega-3 fats. I had no idea about glucose levels. I just didn't even care. And once I learned all of those things, there was absolutely no way I could fall back in disordered eating habits, which I think is interesting as well as the whole other topic. And I just thought, there's so many people out there struggling with diet, and it makes me so sad. And I wanted to get the message out because I thought, well, if I can do it, and I took control of my health with good nutrition. And, I've seen so many other people do it as well, and I just want to help in any way I can. And then I guess when I graduated as a dietitian, I could add services. And so I added, phone consultations, Skype consultations, and then added a few more sort of workshops, presentations, all of these things I can do to spread the message and educate people as well. But, that's Ellipse Health is my baby, but it's also my side thing at the moment because my PhD, which I'm doing at the moment, is taking up the majority of my time.
Wait, you're doing something else for your PhD? It's not the type 1 work that you did?
So the work I did for my master's was the systematic review, and
yes. Okay.
Yeah. So now I've recently enrolled. I enrolled in July into my PhD at the University of Sydney, and that is a PhD based on low carbohydrate diets for type 1 diabetes. So it is still focused on type 1 diabetes. And we do plan to do a primary clinical trial investigating a low carbohydrate diet for type 1. Yeah, so that is the plan. But to get there, we want to be really thorough. So I'm actually doing another systematic review at the moment and trying to collect all this data about how people are formulating low carbohydrate diets for diabetes and whether or not they are effective. And then I'm going to use all this information from the literature to build my own low carbohydrate diet, which will then investigate in a primary trial. So there's still about 2.5 years to go. So all the exciting parts of my PhD are yet to come. But it's, I'm really glad that I am doing a PhD and I am, spending all this time on research. Because I think even though low carbohydrate nutrition has shown its effect in many clinical populations and people are out there doing it, there's still a long way to go before it gets translated into widespread practice, and it's accepted by dietitians and it's accepted by doctors. At the moment it's still laughed about it. People are still shaking their heads. But I think we need to really up the scientific research a little bit and spread what's already there in the literature out to others, and then create new evidence too. And hopefully by the end of my PhD, there'll be a lot stronger evidence supporting low carbohydrate diets for type 1.
Have you considered a VertaHealth type model where, you know, there's an app and they can talk to people? You know, VertaHealth's doing that for type 2. Do you think there's room in the space for that type of model for a type 1 diabetic?
Yeah, I think that would be incredible. And Steve Finney actually came to Australia very recently for Low Carb Gold Coast. So he was here last month. And I got the pleasure of taking him out to lunch with Professor or Dr. Jake Kushner as well. So my friend and I took them out to Sydney, and it was really lovely. We had a great lunch, getting to know them and just relaxing with these amazing people. But I did say to Steve, I did ask, you know, is there capacity for Verta or the Verta technology to be used in a population of type 1 diabetes? And he said, definitely, you know, there's definitely opportunity for it to grow. But at the moment, all the content is specific to type 2. And so, you know, someone would need to go and develop it. And I would love to do that. But at the same time, I think that would probably take a lot longer using the VertaHealth technology. And I think that we would love to come up with a similar sort of design where people are able to, you know, log their progress in real time, and especially for people with type 1, you know, tracking blood glucose levels in real time would be super important. So I think it's definitely a study that we would look at and take a lot away from, you know, the Verta technology, but whether or not the actual technology could be used in type 1 yet, I don't know, but I definitely think that Steve will be thinking about that for the future.
Fantastic. Well, Jessica, I really appreciate you coming on the show. If my listeners would like to, you know, find out more about you, follow you on social media, all that good stuff, how can they do all that?
Yeah, so my website, I think you mentioned, is ellipsehealth.com.au, and my Instagram is Jessica Turton _dietitian, and I think my Twitter is Turton Jessica, but I don't use that all that much, so I would go for the Instagram.
Okay, perfect. Well, guys, we're going to put links to all of that in the show notes. You can find that at mysugarfreejourney.com/podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This is very interesting.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely to chat.
Appreciate that. And guys, if you're listening, hold on. We'll be right back with some more information.